Hello there. This is Caveblazers, and I'm really bad at it. But I decided that it was worth taking a look at anyway, for a number of reasons that we'll get to. So what you're seeing right here is some footage of floor 3, or chamber 3, or level 3. And one of the only times I've ever actually been able to get this far, because I'm really terrible at Caveblazers. However, moving on, Caveblazers is one of these quite zoomed out 2D sort of roguelite-esque games with a focus on the platforming elements and things like that that have come out of the popularity of games like Spelunky, which is a game I'm also absolutely horrific at, which I think is probably why I'm terrible at this as well, since they share the same kind of mechanics and ideas. But that's actually why I wanted to take a look at this, because I've not really done anything like that on this channel before. I've done a lot of roguelites, but I've not done one that is in that sort of pedigree. I really don't understand why I'm so bad at those styles of games. Maybe it's just because I don't play a lot of platformers, and that has a lot to do with it, I'm sure. But there are similar games that I tell myself, at least, that I'm not too bad at, you know. Games like Risk of Rain to Metroidvania-style games, like, you know, Hollow Knight and even Dead Cells, games that are in adjacent positions to this whole genre that I really, really enjoy and love and am actually not too bad at. But when it comes to Spelunky and games in that vein, I'm really bad at them. I don't know why. But I wanted to cover this one anyway. That's why I didn't call this video, I didn't call it a breakdown, because I don't feel like I'm actually good enough to give you a proper look at it, but I wanted to give a look at it regardless, for a number of reasons. Now, the game bills itself as a kind of, well, as I said, like a roguelite with a focus on the platforming elements, but with enough depth and variety in its combat system and RPG elements to actually make those work well too. And it actually does have that. It's actually got a pretty good combat system, which surprised me a little bit. I wasn't expecting that. It's not an insult to the game or anything. I just, you know, you can only do so much in a game. And I was expecting it to have a movement and jumping and everything system reminiscent of things like Super Meat Boy, that sort of feel, and it does have that actually quite well. It feels weighty and with a good amount of momentum, but not sluggish, which is how I would describe Super Meat Boy, another game that I'm terrible at, and I just horribly died there. And for a moment, let's take a look at this. This is the perk system, which is basically like a class system in essence. It allows you to start, if you wish, your character as with different starting weapons and statistics. And the basic one is that one, just with some extra food and some consumable bombs. However, the one I've chosen is called Vortex, and it actually starts you with this interesting ranged weapon, which we'll talk more about in a second. And every floor that you complete, you get these Vortex bombs, which I actually forget to use. I forget to use a lot of the consumables in this game. That's probably another reason I'm awful at it. But there is the ranged weapon that you start with in action. It's a sort of like magic gun, which is kind of neat. And I hate those blue blob things. You've got to kill them at a distance, because if they touch you or when they die, either way, it doesn't matter, they explode. Just detonate. You gotta take care of them quickly. You've also got a very significant variety in weapons and sort of accessories and things like that to get a hold of. I found a lot of different melee weapons as well, but unfortunately I'm not able to show you very many in this footage. I do find a bit of a fancy one later. And there is a ice bow for you. A slower firing, lower damage ranged weapon that can freeze your enemies. And you've also got a directional attack, which you saw there. You can hold up and hit the attack button to swing upwards, and you can also do a diving attack, which I do way too much of because, well, it's good, but I say I do way too much of it because I miss with it a lot of the times, and you're punished very heavily for missing with it because you can, generally speaking, not recover quickly enough to prevent the enemy you just missed from hitting you. Kind of like that. And the areas that you're in are quite expansive and have a lot of, well, they are of course randomly generated, but generally speaking in a way that makes sense. Although you will sometimes find that you cannot go back up if you've gone too far down, unless you have a specific item that allows you to do so, like something that allows you to jump really high, or there are even specific consumables that deliberately teleport you back up to the like to the top of the level so you can go down it again in case there was a branch that maybe had some treasure that you missed before but you can't jump back up. You can wall jump, and it works very well, but you cannot actually sometimes reliably get up some of the odder configurations of walls. Those are blessings. You'll find those hovering around sometimes. They're basically passive perks that increase your survivability by giving you various powers or improvements to your abilities. And you can also see that I equipped a magic item. These are a very interesting part of the game. They act as sort of artifacts that improve your capabilities in one way or another, and a lot of them can actually be charged up and used as well as whatever they provide you just by having them equipped. This particular one doesn't do that because it has an active effect just from firing. As you can see, when I shoot my ranged weapon, it also fires out like that red bolt of energy. But if you see up by my health gauge there, you can see that little eye symbol that shows that I have something equipped. I'm just getting like bum rushed here by a bunch of enemies, but the eye helps to thin them out quite quickly. This particular starting class perk thingy is very clearly meant to be used with ranged attacks a lot more often than being melee focused. However, you'll occasionally find magic items that will take up that same slot and will sometimes give you stats and things like that, but also have a sort of charge bar that fills up. And then when they're fully charged, you can hit a button and cast them effectively, whatever it is they do. I found some really neat ones. I find one later in this footage that is a feather that lets you jump really high for your next jump, which is very useful. I found some that do. I found this one a couple of times, and I'm dead again, that lets me fire out this like rock fist forwards that can bunch up enemies. Basically, the best way I found to use is to bunch up enemies in one direction in front of you and then do a ton of damage to them all at once. It's really effective. Also very good against bosses if you can line up the boss in the correct way, because it only fires directionally forward. But it's very cool. And navigating the levels is very enjoyable. The actual control and navigation is great. As you can see, you can do things like walk... I don't know how that didn't kill me. You can do things like walk through spikes, as long as you don't land on them. You see that little arrow symbol that I just shot to activate? Those are a secret on the first floor, that if you find all of them will lead you to a secret room that I've never beaten. It's a sort of enemy gauntlet that spawns more and more enemies in waves. And every time I've died on a wave of enemies, I've thought, well, surely that was the last one. That couldn't go on any longer than that. I'll try it again, beat that wave now that I know what to expect, and get whatever's at the end. And the next time I try it, I'll beat that wave, and it will go on even farther. And to this day, I have never successfully beaten that enemy gauntlet, so I have no idea what you get at the end of it. Presumably some sort of nice chest drops with some good loot tables. So it's worth doing if you're a lot better at the game than I am, which wouldn't be difficult. And you can find a lot of other interesting things around the dungeon generation, things like, well, there are various types of chests. You saw earlier a big red one that just spewed out money. You can find all these various crates and pots that can drop money and consumables, like that egg, which restores your health, if you can get to it without getting slaughtered. And other various types of chests that are more kind of dedicated to specific factions, like that goblin-y orky chest up there, which tends to have certain things like a battle brew potion and some other stuff like that. There's just a random blessing floating in the air. You also saw earlier those blessings that were on a sort of plinth of 3 different ones, and you could choose one of them to actually, like, acquire, and the other 2 would disappear. You'll find various shrines, some of which are like random item shrines. You pay the gold and it will just spit out a random item for you. It can be almost anything, I found. Sometimes really amazing stuff, and sometimes just like a basic bomb or something. You can also find health shrines. They will refill your health for a price, quite a high price. And there's me missing the diving attack. Super Smash Bros. All over again. And you can also find, there's this one that I found that's your classic sort of roguelite pay health shrine. You can give it health, but I've never actually run into one and had the health to pay. So I don't know what they do. I think there was one time I did, but I was doing so well for once that I didn't want to pay the health. And there's the golden feather that I was talking about, that is a magic item that you can equip that gives you a bigger jump. That is an item shrine. You just pay the amount of money, and it gives you the item that's in it. So the dungeon has lots of features, and there are various sort of pre-built structures and things that can be inserted into the randomly generated dungeon to make it more interesting for you to come across various types of monster dens and things like that, like goblin camps and orc areas and stuff. It's pretty cool. And here's the feather activating. Gives you a really high jump like that. Another thing that I should mention about the game that's very, very cool is the boss design. The boss design in the game is fantastic. They feel really genuinely intimidating, a lot like the bosses from Risk of Rain, how they, like the first few times you fight them, you feel like just figuring out the best way to deal with them and their various attacks is quite a puzzle in and of itself, and you need to kind of solve that problem before you can move on with the actual, beating them part. And they're very challenging. I've only ever managed to beat a boss fight once, which I know is fairly pathetic, but I'm just going to be honest. I've only beaten a boss once, a single time. And later in this footage, you will actually see the boss that I've beaten once, but this particular attempt goes slightly less successfully, we'll say. But I've come very close to beating a couple other bosses, but no cigar on those. I will say also that the boss variety is significant. I don't know exactly how many there are in the game, but just the first set has had at least 4 or 5 that I've seen, which is a lot. I mean, you think of games like Isaac and Gungeon, some of my favorite games in this sort of overarching genre. And you know how every sort of level has a specific set of bosses that can possibly be there. For instance, the first floor of Gungeon has 3 possibilities, not counting the door, I guess. And in this case, on the 3rd level, or well, I guess after the 2nd floor, there's always a boss. And I've seen it be like 4 or 5 different ones. So I'm not sure exactly how the boss spread works in this game, because like I said, I haven't gotten far enough to see if those are all of the bosses and it like repeats them so that you never know which one you're going to get or what. But either way, they're really well designed and they're very challenging, and everyone has quite a different way of actually conquering it. There's one of those health shrines, by the way. One boss has you bounding around a room for quite some time before it even becomes vulnerable for a very short period of time, and you generally have to use like range weapons on it, but melee weapons are possible to use. You just have to be in the right spot at the right time. And a very significant arsenal of attacks that it can use against you. I've also seen a giant worm, which was very Risk of Rain for me because the gameplay in general reminded me a lot of actually fighting the huge worm thingy from Risk of Rain. I love that. That's just a really good game. I'm excited for the sequel to that. Anyway, I love Risk of Rain, but the bosses, yeah, the design is really cool, and I do like that everyone feels different to fight. I haven't fought 2 different bosses in this game that felt anywhere near similar in the way that you're meant to actually conquer them. And that's actually a pretty great achievement, and I think something that Spelunky fans in particular will actually appreciate as well. There's a lot of equipment variety, lots and lots of weapons and stuff like that, and some of them have some really cool effects. There are also these altars. Unfortunately, I didn't actually come across one of those in this footage, but there are some altars that you can come across that you can use to upgrade various weapons. Generally speaking, the method is to have 2 of the same weapon or item, and then put them on the altar. It will consume the altar effectively, and then upgrade whatever you had. Fire sword, yeah. But there are some things that can be upgraded in different ways than that, and the item description will usually tell you that. For instance, the Vortex class that I started as, its range weapon can actually be upgraded simply by placing it on an altar with any other ranged weapon, and it will actually go through various classes of, I guess, various tiers of effectiveness, and I think it gains extra abilities as well, and I'm just gonna, like, screw off to the boss room because I don't want to deal with that. I'm almost dead. Now, because of the feather, I was able to get a slightly better weapon up there, the Moonstone Sword. Very cool. Gives you some resistances, it's quite powerful, and it knocks enemies back quite heavily, although that's not really relevant against this boss. But yeah. And that's pretty neat. And here's a boss. Iron Face, the savage skeletal abomination. And savage it is indeed. You can probably already see how you're meant to defeat it with the rotating shield of blocking and projectile firing things, and the and the bit that you can actually fire through. You're meant to go along the platforms, get to the bit where his face is actually exposed, and shoot and or smack him in said face. I was able to beat this guy once, not too bad, although I get distracted by these blue things. He sometimes will send off the little bits that he has floating around them, and they will attack you separately from the boss itself, which makes the boss battle quite hectic. And in fact, the boss is actually very mean in that even when you have won the battle, the remaining bits will fly off and you have to defeat them afterwards, and they can still kill you even after you've been successful in defeating the boss, which is rude. But I got distracted, forgot about the blue bit floating there, and I was just tunnel visioning on trying to defeat the boss quickly, and I got killed. So yeah, the bosses are quite difficult. Anyway, that's been Caveblazers. It is a really good game. Oh yeah, and there's a lot of visual customization of your character as well. You can have all of this for the low, low price of $10 if you wish. Very well worth it. On Steam, of course, I'll link you in the description. Give it a look if you're a Spelunky fan. And I'll see you next time.